Welcome back to my series on chess opening theory. In this video, I'm going to be giving an introduction to the exchange variation of the French defense. So the French defense is when we have the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, pawn to e6, d4, d5, e takes d5, and black now replies with e takes d5. I should note, just very quickly, that I do not recommend that black try to avoid the exchange variation by playing queen takes d5, as this position is just very good for white. White will just have very easy development, very strong control of the center. White can play knight f3, knight c3 if they want, but I personally like the move c4, just taking central space. Black's going to have to waste some time moving their queen again, and white has, very intuitive development, a very easy game to play, whereas black's bishop still has its usual problem of being blocked by this pawn on e6. So as much as black might be tempted to do so, I do not recommend that black try to avoid the exchange variation. Instead, the best move is pawn takes e5. So here we now have the exchange variation, and in this line, black already has equality. What we see here is that the situation in the center has been mostly clarified. Each side has lost a central pawn, making it more difficult to fight for control of the center. And black's biggest problem in the French defense, the development of this bishop, has been solved. But there is another problem that black has to deal with, and that is that the exchange variation is very drawish and has a reputation of being very boring. And as a result, the exchange variation is usually not a good choice for white. However, it does have some uses. For example, the best use for it, in my opinion, is I highly recommend the exchange variation to beginners, as it is not a very theoretical line. It's not a very complicated opening, and it allows beginners to focus more on improving their tactics, improving their knowledge of fundamental checkmating patterns, as well as basic endgames. So it's a good choice for beginners, in my opinion, as it's not very theoretical, and there isn't really much point in learning like 10 or 20 moves of opening theory if you're not going to be able to actually know how to win the game when you get that nice position out of the opening. Another use for the exchange variation is when white has a significantly lower rating than black, and basically white is very happy to play for a draw. So as a result, in my videos, I'm mainly going to be focusing on ways that black can try to make the position interesting. Basically, try to change this kind of equality, the boring kind of equality where everything's symmetric and where the game is likely to be a draw, into dynamic equality, where there are a number of imbalances on the board and where each side has equal winning chances, and the winner is most likely going to be the player who is more skilled. So in this position, there are three main moves for white. There are three moves that are fairly popular. In fact, there are two moves that are much more popular than any of the others, and those are the moves knight to f3 and bishop to d3, and these two moves often transpose to each other because they're very often played one right after the other. The idea just being that white wants to castle kingside quickly. And the third most popular move, which is somewhat interesting, is the move pawn to c4. And the reason why this move is a bit interesting is if black plays d takes c4 and white replies with bishop takes c4, then the pawn on d4 will be isolated and white will not be able to defend it with other pawns, thus leading to an interesting imbalance on the board. Would this pawn be good? Would this pawn be bad? That's, for the players to figure out over the course of the game. And aside from those three main moves, there are also quite a few other options that white has. Quite a few other options have been played, including the move bishop to f4, the move knight to c3, moves h3, g3, bishop to e3 has been played, queen to e2 check has been played, bishop to e2 is probably playable, pawn to a3 looks strange but could probably be played. I don't think b3 makes much sense just because the bishop will be biting on a pawn, but anyway. There are quite a few options for white, quite a few options, so it would be kind of overwhelming to try to, memorize all of them. In my videos, I'm mainly going to focus on these two moves, and I'm also going to do at least one video on pawn to c4, and maybe a video on one of the sidelines, if there's an interesting idea. But anyway, for this game, we're going to be looking at a game where white played knight f3 and then bishop d3 right afterwards. And with the white pieces, we have Grandmaster Valentina Gunina, who is a grandmaster from Russia and who has won a number of prestigious tournaments in the Women's League, including the European Individual Chess Championship, the Russian Women's Championship, as well as being on the winning team of the Women's Chess Olympiad, the European Team Chess Championship, and the Women's World Team Championship. She also has played in open events as well, so events with that include male grandmasters as well, and even won the Rapid Super Play section, hopefully I'm remembering that correctly, in the London Chess Classic in 2016. And with the black pieces, we have Grandmaster Abhijit Gupta, who is a grandmaster from India, and he has also won a number of prestigious events, including the World Junior Championship in 2008, as well as the Indian Championship in 2011, and he also has played in the Olympiads and was a board 4 silver medalist in 2012. He also has a course on Chessable on the Chigorin defense. And this particular game was played at the Gibraltar Masters tournament in 2018, and more information about the players and the event can be found in the video description. So back to the game. So in the game, white played the move knight to f3, and black replied with the move knight to f6. In fact, knight to f6 is actually a great move for black to play against pretty much anything that white does, as black doesn't yet have that much information about white's setup, but f6 is just a good square for this knight to go to. It's one of the best squares for this knight. Black probably does want to castle kingside soon. On h6, it would be poorly placed because white can just take it, damage black's pawn structure, and on e7, it would block black's dark squared bishop. Although black could, play bishop to d6 or something first, and then play knight to e7. So that's a reasonable move, but in general, knight to f6 is just a great move for black to play in just about any scenario. Black can just about pre-move this move. Anyway, white continued with the move bishop to d3, and here the most popular move by black is the move bishop to d6, but I don't like this move because it is very, very drawish. In fact, after the move castles kingside by white, which is the main move, 80% of games in the Lichess Masters database end in a draw. Like 80%. That's just ridiculous. That's not what we want. So as a result, I do not like the move bishop to d6. It's just way too symmetric, way too drawish. We want to make some kind of imbalance. So in the game, black instead played the move pawn to c5. And I really like this move. This is a very cool idea. Now that black has some information about white's setup, black plays the move pawn to c5 and basically argues that the bishop on d3 is misplaced. That d3 is not a good square for this bishop to be, and black wants to then play pawn to c4 and force this bishop to move again. So the main move in this position is to castle kingside, and I will be looking at a game that features that. But in this game, white instead played the move pawn takes c5, and this introduces an imbalance already, since the pawn on d5 is now isolated. So black played the move bishop takes c5, the most intuitive move. There's no reason for black not to just take this pawn right now. Oh, and another reason why the pawn moving to c5 argues that the bishop on d3 is a bit misplaced is because very often in isolated pawn positions, the players will be fighting over the square in front of the pawn. So in this case, the d4 square. And the reason why the bishop on d3 might be misplaced is because it is now in the way of the queen, blocking it from defending the d4 square. White probably wants to blockade this pawn, generally with a knight, and play against it. Isolated pawns are very double-edged. They're very interesting because even though they can't be defended by their neighboring pawns, the files next to them are open and can be used for attacking, and very often the diagonals around them are also useful for attacking as well. So is the pawn good? Is it bad? That's for the players to figure out. So white then castled kingside. Black also castled kingside. Reasonable move. One thing that I should mention really quick is that if white goes for the move queen to e2 check, black can just block with bishop to e6. And if white goes after the bishop pair with the move knight to g5, then black can just play queen to e7. And black is actually totally okay with this trade because even though white has the bishop pair, black is the only one who has central pawns, and the isolated pawn on d5 has been, kind of been improved by, bringing this friend over to the e file. Not only that, but the f file will now have opened up, and maybe black can go after the pawn on f2, maybe try to attack that. So this would still be a very interesting, very equal, very imbalanced position, and black would probably be quite happy to have this. But that's not what happened in the game. Instead of playing queen e2 check, white castled kingside, and black castled kingside. So this position is already fairly imbalanced. There are not that many games in the database that feature this position. But already it looks like this is probably not going to be a draw. This just looks like fun. And what's most interesting is that the most commonly played move by white in this position turns out to actually be a little bit inaccurate. And white did in fact play the most commonly played move, which is the move bishop to g5. And here, black just plays the move pawn to h6, questioning the bishop, asking it where it's going. And here, if white just plays bishop takes knight, then black can take back with the queen with tempo, because the queen is now attacking this pawn over here. And black would probably be quite happy to have this position, just developing their queen immediately, probably developing this bishop to e6 as white's probably going to be playing knight c3 just to block the threat on the b2 pawn. And then there would be just an interesting imbalanced game of chess, which is what we want. But that's not what happened in the game. Instead, white played the move bishop to h4, and black insisted on an interesting game by playing the move pawn to g5, getting a bit aggressive. And normally, pushing the pawns in front of your king, that's something very dangerous. That's something you usually don't want to do. But in this case, it's justified because white can't really get at black's king so easily. Like, white doesn't have enough firepower to properly attack black's king. For example, if white tries this little sacrifice of knight takes pawn, pawn takes knight, bishop takes, then black can, black can just develop. Black has enough pieces to defend their king. And like white could try knight to f3, and black can try to defend actively with knight e4, hitting the bishop, potentially giving up another pawn, but that's okay because white is already up a piece. And then in this position, white can just calmly develop with black can just calmly develop with knight c6, and then just bring their pieces over and defend their king. Like black would be doing very, very well here. So then the knight. Oh, and also another thing I forgot to mention is maybe white might have some ideas of playing bishop e7 at some point in the future. Like not currently possible because of that. But anyway, the knight sacrifice on g5 would be unsound. And black will just try to trade queens, trade into an endgame, and use their extra piece to win the game. But that is not what happened in the game. Instead, in this position, white played the move bishop to g3, and black plays the move knight to e4, or striking forward with their knight, getting ready to play the move pawn to f5, putting some pressure on white. Right, and what's interesting is that in this position, there is only one move for white that is good, that lets white kind of keep dynamic equality. If you want, you can pause the video and try to find it. It's not a move that wins material. It's just more of just a very simple positional sort of idea. I will reveal the move in 3, 2, 1. So the move that would keep white in the game, which might seem a bit intuitive, intuitive depending on what you know about chess, is the move pawn to c4, and this move, would basically have white be fighting back. Very often when your opponent starts attacking you on the side of the board like this, the way to deal with that is to counterattack in the center. And so that's why when launching an attack, you very often want the center to be closed, because then your opponent can't do this. Because if they blast the center open, then it'll be easier for them to get at your king. But this is not what happened in the game. Instead, white played the second best move, which is knight bd2. But sadly, this move is kind of a distant second, as black now has a very nasty move, pawn to f5, and the idea behind this move is black is threatening to play f4, which would trap this bishop. Not only that, but black is defending the knight over here with the pawn. So if white plays like knight takes knight, black can just take back with either pawn and be forking these two pieces. Even bishop takes knight is no good, because black could take back with the d pawn, hitting this knight, and then play f4 to trap the bishop. So this is just a nice move that, kind of counters white's idea of trying to trade away the aggressive knight with a nice idea of, getting rid of this bishop. And so here in this position, white had to play a move that is quite ugly, that move being bishop takes knight. And the reason why that move is quite ugly is because white has moved this bishop many times, playing bishop g5, bishop h4, bishop g3, only to now just trade it for a piece that hasn't moved once. And it might look like white might be able to save this bishop by playing a move like pawn to h3, but the problem with that is that the pawn on f2 is actually pinned, so black can just take this bishop for free. This pawn cannot take back. That is not a legal move because it is pinned to the king. Anyway, So white kind of made the only option they had available, which is taking the knight over here. Here, like, bishop to e5 isn't really all that good, since black would probably just keep attacking the bishop, keep harassing it, and also the bishop would be coming away from the defense of the f2 pawn. But anyway, that's not what happened in the game. Instead, black played rook takes b8, and here, black does have some dark square weaknesses around their king side, namely the g7 square and h8 square. Here, but since white had to trade away their bishop, black doesn't really have to worry too much about dark square weaknesses, and if black can put their queen on f6, then all of those weaknesses are taken care of. Black will just be better. Black will just have this very nice pawn avalanche that's coming forward. So white played knight e3, attacking black's bishop, and also eyeing the square on d4, as remember that black has this isolated pawn. White wants to put something on the square in front of that pawn in order to alleviate some of the pressure on white's position, in particular to block the diagonals surrounding the square. Black played bishop b6 because black does not want to trade. Black does not, basically black has the bishop pair, and that can be a useful advantage. White played knight fd4, blockading the pawn. Black played queen to f6. Next, developing the queen and also safeguarding these dark square weaknesses. White plays pawn to c3 because the knight is under attack by black's queen and bishop. Black played bishop to d7, developing their bishop, getting ready to perhaps improve the positioning of this rook. White now played queen to c2. The engine prefers for white to instead play bishop to b5, with perhaps the idea of trading away this set of bishops, as generally when your opponent has the bishop pair, one way to deal with that is to just trade away one set of bishops, as the bishops are much stronger when they are together. But that's not what happened in the game. We have queen c2. And black plays rook be8, getting this rook into the game. Black has developed all of their pieces. This is very good. White plays rook ad1, putting this rook onto a good square. Maybe the other rook wants to come to e1 at some point. And here, black plays the move bishop to c8, which I think was a bit unnecessary. Like, part of the idea of bishop c8 might have just been to prevent bishop to b5. But in my opinion, I think just pawn to a6 would have been a better way of doing that, since that would also stop, knight from coming to b5, stuff like that. And even though pawn to a6, the downside of that move would be that it does weaken the dark squares around the queenside pawns. Black's the only one who has a dark square bishop, so dark square weaknesses are less of a concern. But anyway, white played king to h1, and now black played pawn to a6. Next, what's interesting to note is that even if bishop to c8 was a waste of time, it's kind of okay for black to play like this, since in this position, white doesn't really have much counterplay. White doesn't really have a plan that they're working towards. Usually, when you're launching an attack on the opponent, every move matters. Every move needs to have a purpose. Every move is critical. You can't afford to be wasting tempo. But in this case, since white doesn't actually seem to really have much that they can do, black can actually just make these improving moves, like spend his time making improving moves, and basically strike when they are ready. Like, strike when all the pieces are ready and cannot be improved anymore. So in this position, white played the move bishop to e2, and black played the move king to h8, improving the safety of the king, as the king is more vulnerable on light squares than it is on dark squares, because white still has a light square bishop, but not a dark square bishop. White plays the move bishop to h5, trying to do something, but it's honestly very hard to find something for white to do. Black plays rook to e7, and white now plays the move rook de1, which was the right idea, but the wrong move order. So the idea of rook de1 is that white wants to play pawn to f3 to kick this knight away, and then trade a set of rooks. As generally, when your opponent is attacking you, one way to deal with that is to just trade some pieces off the board, as it's very hard for your opponent to attack you if they don't have any pieces. Now, the reason why this was the wrong move order will be apparent in a moment. Like, instead, white should have just gone pawn to f3 right away, which would force the knight back, and then play rook de1, then try going for this trade. And the reason why will be apparent in a moment. One thing that I forgot to mention was that the reason why white played the move king to h1 is in order to get the king off of this nasty diagonal that the bishop is on, as there could be potential tactics there if white pushed the f-pawn prematurely, and what's it called? The king was still here. So anyway, in the game, white played the move rook de1, and black played the move bishop to c7 with kind of sneaky little idea. White played the move pawn to f3, and if you want, you can pause the video and try to find the move that black now played. It's sort of a tactic. It's a tactic that you should be familiar with, but it's not a tactic that wins any material. It's just a useful tactic nonetheless. It's more of a positional tactic, if you prefer. So I will reveal the move in 3, 2, 1. The move that black played was queen to d6, threatening checkmate on the h2 square, but also freeing up the f6 square for this knight, as black wants to keep this knight on the king side because that is where black is playing. And the knight would not be as happy on d6, as even though, that is a nice centralized square, it's not on the king side. Black wants to be playing on the king side. So black is threatening checkmate here, and there aren't many nice ways of stopping mate. It's pretty unpleasant. So white decided to stop checkmate by playing the move pawn to f4, and this is a very understandable move, very human move. The big problem with pawn to f4 is it basically means that this knight is going to be a permanent problem. This knight can no longer be kicked away by any pawn. Pawn is just going to always be sitting here. The engine considers pawn to f4 inaccurate, but wants white to instead play the move pawn to g4, which is looks pretty scary, looks pretty risky, because white would be pushing the pawns in front of their king, but white is, already expecting to be attacked on the king's side, so this is a very uncomfortable move for white to be playing. The way that this defends mate is just by the queen defending the h2 square, by the way. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game. White played pawn to f4, and, well, this is actually a free pawn. Not only is this knight a permanent problem, but this is a free pawn. So black took the free pawn, and even though black's pawn structure looks quite funny, all of these pawns are isolated. All of these pawns are double-edged. These pawns are as much assets as they are weaknesses. In fact, I would say this pawn is more of an asset than it is a weakness, as it helps control the g3 square and helps prevent white from playing pawn to g3. So in this position, white decided to start maneuvering this knight over to the king side, right, as white knows that they're being attacked. So white played the move knight to c1. And in my opinion, I think the move knight to d2 is interesting, just with the idea of putting this knight on f3, as a knight on f3 is often, a very helpful defensive resource. And then black could play queen to f6, like what happened in the game. I could play knight 2 to f3, and now the queen can't come to the h4 square. That's part of the reason why knight to f3 is good. But this wouldn't really save white by any means. In fact, the engine prefers white's idea much more than mine. Black could play rook g8. I could play queen d1 just to potentially defend the bishop on h5. And then black could actually offer an exchange sacrifice with rook g5, as if white takes, these pawns are very strong, but not only that, but this file would get opened up. And if instead of taking the exchange sacrifice, if instead white defends this bishop with a move like knight to h4, in fact, I think that might be the only move that defends the bishop, black could just double the rooks on the g file and keep their attack going. But this is not what happened in the game. Like, what happened in the game is probably objectively better than this suggestion. But anyway, white played the move knight to c1. And black then played the move queen to f6. Next, white played the move knight to d3, attacking the pawn on f4. Or black played the move queen to h4. Or black... So, here part of what I don't like about this for white is just the fact that black is both attacking this bishop, but also threatening knight g3 check, which would fork the king and rook. White played bishop to f3, and black actually wasn't interested in winning the material, even though it's actually the engine's preference. Like, black can just play this. The pawn cannot take because it is pinned. White goes here, black takes, and this would be fine for black. Like, black would just be winning here. But black, I guess, was not interested in doing this. Black instead played bishop to d7. Like, to be fair, this is a very, very nice knight, very strong knight. Like maybe black just really didn't want to give it up. White played king g1, getting out of this pin, no longer allowing black that exchange. Black now played bishop to b5, improving the position of their bishop. White plays pawn to a4, questioning the bishop, asking black, what are your plans with this bishop? Up, and let's see. Black put the bishop on c4, basically saying my plans are very nasty things. I want my bishop to do, like, to stay on this diagonal in particular, where it's pinning the knight to the rook. White plays rook d1. Black moves the other bishop to b6. These bishops are just monsters. They are very scary. White's king is very scared. White's king is going, oh no, and the bishops are like, haha, king, we are going to take away all your squares. You will have nowhere to run. So white played a move that is very human in this position. That is the move pawn to b3. And this forces black to trade their bishop for white's knight. But the problem with pawn to b3 is that it makes it greatly weakens the pawn on c3. So black took the knight, white took back, and black plays rook c8. Putting some more pressure on this pawn, which is currently pinned to the queen. And also black is going to play against this nice pin that black has on the knight to the king. So black is putting a lot of pressure on white. Right, so white plays queen to b2. And black sees that their king is on the same diagonal as this queen, as like, I'm going to get my king out of there. Like, black is in no hurry. Black is in no rush. And, what's it called? Black is getting ready to do nasty things, and it's very hard to find a good move for white. Like the move that white did play was just to move pawn to h3, and the engine doesn't like this move, but the engine's preference doesn't really make much of a difference. Like the engine prefers for white to play pawn to a5, but black doesn't even have to take this pawn. Black can just back up their bishop. And then it's like, and then what? And it's like, yeah, I don't know what white does here. It's very hard to find a good move for white, so I don't hate the move pawn to h3. White has to do something. It's one of the rules of chess. And now, if you want, you can, what's it called? You can just try to find black's next move. Like there are probably a number of good moves for black here, but there's one move in particular that just simplifies things and ends the game very quickly. I will reveal the move in 3, 2, 1. So black played the move rook takes c3. A very nice move, just getting rid of this pawn, on blasting open the position, making some trades. And let's see. White, of course, cannot take this rook right away because then the knight would drop immediately. So white instead took the knight like this, and black took back with the d pawn, partially because black probably wants to keep, more pawns, kind of defending the king along the diagonals like this. It kind of prevents checks from the queen in a way. But anyway, I think taking with f might have been okay as well. Oh, but I agree with black. I think taking with d is better. Anyway, in this position here it's important to note that rook takes c3 still fails to the same trick. Like just taking this, and then, what's very interesting is that black wouldn't even be taking this rook right away. After king h1, and black can play queen f6, it's threatening to take the rook for free. And if white now plays rook fc1, then black just starts pushing this pawn down the board, and white will not be able to stop it. White's pieces are all tied up, they're all stuck, and black will just push this pawn down. So that's one important thing to mention. Another interesting line is queen takes c3, and in this position, black can just take the rook. The knight is still pinned to the king. Black is threatening to play rook e4, which would win the knight. Right? The what's it called? The queen can't come to c7 because this bishop does a great job of covering that one check. So if white were to play king to h1, then black can just play queen to f6, pinning the knight to this queen instead. And white really doesn't want to trade queens here because the endgame would just be completely lost just due to this pawn being very strong. And if white tries the move rook takes f4 just to defend the knight, then black can just reply with rook e4, and white could take this pawn and give up the knight, or white can further trade and just go into the losing endgame. So anyway, I thought I should just mention all that. Back in this position, where we looked at rook takes c3 and queen takes c3, the move that was actually played in the game was the move rook d2, trying to just avoid all these simplifications, but sadly that's not possible. And this black just plays rook d3, forcing a trade. We have rook takes, pawn takes, and we basically have a similar situation as before, only this time, instead of going for the queen f6 idea, black decided to end things in style with another move that wins, which is rook to e1. And here, white resigned, and I should probably explain all of these crazy arrows. Basically, white is forced to take this rook, as it is under attack. Like the rook trade is completely forced. first, and after black takes with check, there's only one move, king h2. Then black can drop their queen back to e5, and this knight will fall. Oh, like I think I remember there being one variation that does involve of black pushing the pawn up the board. I think that's the variation where it's something like white plays king g1, black plays rook takes. Is it that? Let's see, rook takes rook, king takes, and then stuff like that. I don't know. Anyway, white's position is hopeless. After king g1, I think black can just play pawn to f3 or something, and the queen hits the knight that way. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, and bye for now.